everybody to today's talk. We are very pleased to welcome Nataniel, Dr. Nataniel Ruiz, who is a research scientist at Google. Nataniel did his undergraduate degree at École Polytechnique in Paris, and then was a PhD student with Professor ZipLoRA at BU, Boston University. So he's welcome. And I met Nataniel about 5 years ago when Brown hosted the New England Diffusion symposium, and he was a second year PhD student, so something like that. Since then, he's done varied and interesting work. Most famously, probably the DreamBooth paper, which was an intern project.
It was an intern project.
Yeah, and we worked. And it's incredibly complex. So today, Tanya is going to tell us about that lineage of work and how to personalize large generative models to accomplish very specific edits and all of the consequences of that work. So let's start with that.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you so much, James, for inviting me. And yeah, super excited to talk about all the work that we've been doing. I think since DreamBooth happened, we haven't stopped basically. That's kind of the message. And I think DreamBooth kind of, or I mean, not DreamBooth specifically, but since the advent of the diffusion models that were able to generate really high quality images, such as Imagine and DALL-E 2, a host of new applications that weren't possible before have appeared. And the kind of message of this talk is you're able to now, I think, with these like really large models that are in language, that are in images and video, a lot of them are generative. You're able to, using the extremely strong priors that they have, you're able to unlock new magical applications. If you think about the problem hard enough and you are a little bit kind of creative in the approach. And I think the broader message is, if you're interested in this type of stuff, or if you're struggling with a project now, there's a lot of options out there for you guys to explore. And any of you can find these options if you just kind of think about it enough and find the right people to talk about these things with. So yeah, the talk is called Unlocking Magic, Personalization of Diffusion Models for Novel Applications. And there's kind of like just a kind of like teaser slide with a lot of the projects that we've done since DreamBooth. And I'll try to deep dive into a lot of these, but not all of these because we don't have no fun. So raise of hands, who knows about DreamBooth, just has heard of it. And then who knows, like basically the algorithm or has more knowledge about it. Okay, so we will then go through this. So paper name was DreamBooth, fine-tuning text and diffusion models for subject-driven generation. And it won honorable mention for student paper award, I believe. So it's one of 5 or 6 best paper awards at CVPR 2023. And this is with great people at Google. Some of them are now at other companies, but when this was an intern project at Google with my host here at Evan. So the problem that we were targeting was this problem of subject-driven generation, which is given a limited set, which is small, of images of a specific subject or object, like this clock here. Can you generate more images of this subject or object under different conditions or different places with different modifications? Obviously, the kind of historical answer was no, this problem is really, really hard. And GANs really weren't able to target this problem. And maybe they were starting to be able to with faces, but that's kind of about it. And if you try to attack this problem with the current diffusion models when we release this paper, such as Imagine, then one way to do it would be to just have a really long specific prompt about the object and try to do that and then try to generate it in different contexts. So if you try to describe this in like a million possible different ways, you will never really get the exact clock that you want. You don't really have subject fidelity. At least you're able to put it in different contexts, but you don't have subject fidelity. Another way to do it was with these clip embeddings. So DALL-E worked with these like translated clip embeddings, and it was conditioned on these clip embeddings. You could extract these from images. So, one idea is extract them from the reference images and then use DALL-E to generate more images of this clock. And actually clip embeddings are not fine-grained enough. And we'll come back to this kind of like, trope like later on, like this idea of embeddings not being able to express subject fidelity. But yeah, that was one thing. So you tried to regenerate this clock using these clip embeddings, and it gave you like a clock with a 3, but it wasn't exactly the clock you were looking for. Whereas with DreamBooth, we're able to tackle both. And then kind of the cool thing about DreamBooth is that once we were able to find a method that worked, then it would do a lot of other different things. Just given the interface for these models, which is text to image, then you could actually add new different modifications to your subject. So the core idea of DreamBooth is fine-tuning on just a few images allows you to insert your subject into the output domain of the model without overriding the prior of the model. And then basically you're able to call that subject again and again under different contexts and with different modifications. So here an example of the reference images there, the dog appearing in the Acropolis in a bucket and even doing like different actions, swimming and stuff. So you can see the prior of the model is extremely strong here. So the method summary, we're going to go through this a bit fast, but basically the core idea is like giving a name to the subject that you are going to try to insert into the domain of the model. Here the name that we give it is this unique identifier V. You can't, like if you try to pick any name, sometimes some names don't work very well. So you can imagine like if you name it something that is actually like purple or something, right? Like the model will obviously get confused. So we found that some unique identifiers work better than others, and they had to be rare in the vocabulary of the text encoder. Usually those work really well because the model hasn't seen those at all. So it doesn't have a very strong prior with respect to those. That's one idea. So name the subject. So another part of the core algorithm of DreamBooth is come up with like sentences that you're able to pair with your images such that you can fine tune on them. And the structure of we tried a lot of things. So we tried to do like long prompts for them, like describe everything about the scene. Actually, you don't really need that. We found that just A, V, and then followed by a class name for your class was the best thing. So for example, for a dog, you would say A, V, dog, and then that's the sentence you would use for your super-equivalent pairs. Yeah, and now some people don't even use the class label. I don't think it's strictly necessary. It just helped a lot with the results at the time. And in some cases, like for rare objects, you don't really have a class name, so you don't even have to use that. And I mean, now even like a bigger advance is actually to learn this token instead of just using a static token by using textual inversion and just like combining the best of both methods. So that's a really nice technique as well. Sometimes it is preferred in some cases, not all cases, but I think in some cases it does work much better. So then once you have that, you personalize your image model. So you basically do fine tuning over these image pairs, like few image pairs that you have, pairs with respect to the text. And then you can at inference time regenerate your dog in the beach or walking on a colorful carpet or with other base modifications.
Quick question, if you're not, I was always under the impression that this was always learning a custom embedding for that token. If you're not doing that, if you're doing this version where you just have this unique identifier, what part of the model is being fine-tuned here?
So you get success with almost every single configuration. The only requirement is that you need to fine-tune the user.
Okay.
So then if you fine-tune the unit, it works. If you fine-tune the unit plus the text embed and encoder, it also works. Like clip model for stable diffusion. And or if you do the embedding learning, etc., that also works. But yeah, fine-tuning all of the parameters of the unit was the original formulation of DreamBooth. And then you can extend that to a little bit further to train your text encoder.
Okay.
And that is basically because text encoder kind of like understands a little bit of that, word, and then so the unit will also be able to associate that to the subject. And the paper, by the way, the textual inversion paper came around the same time as DreamBooth. So those were kind of like concurrent, targeting similar problems. They were learning the text embedding. So, and then now I think it became pretty common to use both together in a lot of ways. So some of the things we can do are recontextualization, putting a subject in different locations, like this backpack in Boston or, in the Grand Canyon. So it becomes really expansive, right? Yeah, you can do a lot of different things. I think this one really kind of like was one of the most popular ones, artistic rendition. So you can just say your dog in the style of, and then a famous artist, or even like different artistic movements, etc. So Van Gogh and Michelangelo statue, like all of these look really, really great. And I was honestly surprised when these started to come out. Some of them like really looked like art to me. And it really made me think, okay, this is a viable way of generating art maybe in the future, and now it is, I think. So in a lot of ways, AI art is valid in a lot of artistic circles, and in some it's absolutely hated, but we'll leave that to artists. Okay, so and this one also gave rise to the faces. So like if you saw a lot of like AI selfies, they were using DreamBooth at the beginning, like all of those companies and startups were using DreamBooth or slightly modified versions of DreamBooth. Yeah, it made it to New York Times with like what is it called? Luma? No, not Luma. I forget, but there was like an app on iOS that was very famous. That was it. It wasn't Luma. So then another thing is property modification. So you could do like hybrid. So your dog with a different type of dog or a different species, and you get like a panda hybrid or hippo hybrid, but still like the essence is very well preserved. And I think, like you can see these and still you're pretty impressed how people are trying to address the DreamBooth problem a lot, right? With like faster methods, because you have to do fine tuning, it takes a little bit of time, right? People are trying to address this like, oh, can we do just a forward pass and it works? But I don't think any method until now can do this for everything, for all types of object subjects, and with this type of huge change, right? Maybe sometimes you could do stylization of a face into like, oh, an artistic version of that face, and just constrain yourself to the face domain, but can you actually get results that are this good, and these results are 2 years old? I think it's really hard without fine tuning. So that's like a still huge open question for the field, is whether we can all get here using that. I think it actually, again, going on a tangent here, but I think this has to do something with like, if you see GPT 01, right? So it's using this like chain of thought, and you basically train another model to do this chain of thought prompting behind the scenes, and to like kind of keep doing that until it arrives to like a good answer in some sense. This is like test time chain of thought prompting, I guess. You could think of DreamBooth though as like test time training, right? You're training not on the actual thing you want to generate, but on something, at least on the images that you want to embed into the model. They have some similarities in that sense. And I think that's why, right now, okay, O1 is like beating all the other models, right? And people will copy that soon, and we'll get the that point very soon. But the thing is, like, this already has increased all of our costs for every single query that we want, because we're gonna have to do this like behind the scenes chain of thought prompting with a auxiliary model. And this is what DreamBooth was 2 years ago, and now people are trying to do the inverse and try to do like the fast DreamBooth. But is it actually, can you actually beat it? I think it's really an open question. Okay, now for the more light topics. So you could do accessorization, so you can accessorize your dog. And still, I think it's really impressive, right? Like a lot of credit also to that first Imagine team who now have a startup. This model was great, and you can still see these outputs would still be like kind of state of the art even now, just with the vanilla DreamBooth algorithm and that first Imagine model. So one of the cool things that we were able to do is we were able to generate the first the first AI generated comic with a consistent character. And these are comic strip, kind of like a character that was created by a friend of mine in Bolivia. And she just drew like 4 versions of this character, and then you could generate, a comic. And I generated this comic. The story is really bad because I'm not a writer, but still, like you can see the comic, the character there and all the kind of frames, and also you can see some big changes like this one. Like the model had never seen something like this before. So those are still some of the most impressive things that you can see out of DreamBooth. And honestly, some of the things that you don't see out of those like fast methods. Sorry, I didn't mean this to be a critique of fast methods for the whole presentation. We'll get to my attempt of the fast method in a bit. Okay, so how do we evaluate DreamBooth? This is actually another kind of pain point and like sticking point for like these last 2 years that I've been thinking about is it was really hard to like figure out how to evaluate this new task. One important way for us, and you'll see it in a bit, is to ask human beings what they thought about the images that you generated. But another thing is like you want like automated metrics because you want kind of people to report these and you want a benchmark data set so that everyone can compare their methods against each other. And I think this is one thing that hasn't really robustly happened since we put out the paper. And there are some attempts, but I think there's still a ways to go for a really good metric. So yeah, like how do you know, like humans know that this dog is exactly the same as this dog, right? Like I think, you know, 100% in this room might say that at least. And then, but the backgrounds are different, okay. But then, okay, this dog is similar, but it's not this dog, right? And then this dog is also similar, but also is kind of AI generated a little bit and is maybe similar to this dog. In a lot of situations, some metrics might prefer this image and say that it's closer to this image just because of the backgrounds. And you know, this is something that we're completely trying to avoid. So you want to know that you want to have a metric that discriminates subjects. Okay, so like to start a journey of trying to evaluate this task, we collected a data set of 30 subjects with several images per subject and a bunch of prompts, and then we open source this data set. And our kind of like golden standard for evaluating this still, I think, for me at least, is a user study. So generating a bunch of these images and then getting users to say which one they prefer. So for 2 questions here, subject fidelity. Subject fidelity, is the subject identity preserved? Or prompt fidelity, does this follow the prompt, right? And compared to the only comparable work at the time, which was textual inversion, our method is more powerful than that method. But yeah, diving more into the subject fidelity metrics thing, like we would love to have a metric and you don't have to do user studies every single time. But at the time, like CLIP was used, so cosine CLIP cosine similarity between 2 CLIP embeddings. So here, for example, using CLIP, the CLIP image score, this synthetic sample here compared to this reference real sample has a higher score than the real sample. So, but you know, we're trying to say that this is the same as this, like this little card. Yeah. And sometimes, okay, maybe you can like segmentation is actually another annoying part because you add an extrinsic thing into your evaluation pipeline, it's not good, right? You could segment and sometimes it helps and sometimes this is because of the background that it's doing these errors, but not always. So CLIP gets these images wrong, but Dino at the time, Dino V1 didn't. So there were a lot of cases like this in the data set that I saw, and I was like, okay, I think I had a feeling that Dino was a slightly better metric than CLIP for these subject comparisons, and you know some of the data like supported that. So we just reported both, and then we kind of said it's a good idea to report both or as many metrics as you can in the future. So a lot of people started picking up on this Dino metric for this type of task, and I think a lot of like object similarity stuff happens with Dino V2 now. But still, this is not a perfect metric because background can be ambiguous as well. And a lot of other things, by the way, just a small point here, a lot of other things are super ambiguous here. So if you go back to this slide, this is not just background differences, right? Like this dog is the same as this dog, but like this is a completely different style. If you were to do this with like faces and get a face a similarity metric like that are super powerful, they break completely into different styles. So that's another thing that you would want to be robust to. Okay, so that's it for DreamBooth. And now we're gonna go into one follow-up work that we did. So this is style drop. This work was led by Kia. And the idea for this is, okay, DreamBooth is basically fine-tuning of diffusion models for subjects, works extremely well. Can we do the same for styles? And DreamBooth, style drop is able to generate new images in a learned style using only one reference style image. That's what we found. So it's able to kind of completely learn the style of something that I had never seen before and able to generate new things in that style. For example, here for the Android figurine here, you either, one image works, but sometimes you give it more and it works a little bit better. But a lot of times only one image is required, and then you can generate a, little Android bird or Android dog, Android octopus, and all these are really amazing. There's a lot of depth to this paper if you go in, and there were a lot of kind of cool things that we did, but I'm not gonna go through all of it, just gonna do a quick presentation. Yeah, you can see for a lot of different other types like this line brine. Yeah, and this 3D kind of isometric thing, and it gets like colorful LED, but also gets a little bit of the semantics for like viewpoint and 3D-ness and other like more abstract style elements. And I think this kicks off kind of avenue of research on style learning and trying to do even like just style transfer was a huge thing before, right? And this is kind of like one way of like inserting your style to then do style transfer, etc. I was gonna say something here, and I forgot, but should be okay. So yeah, it's able to learn a lot of different things like these like cartoon drawings. I was going to linger here for a second on some topic, but I guess I'll come back if I ever figure it out. So okay, so we're able to do DreamBooth for subjects and then style drop for styles. Now DreamBooth had a really big disadvantage, right? So okay, so one thing that happened at the time was that AI selfies were becoming huge, and I think still are very important. But a lot of companies want to like deploy their own kind of like AI selfie system, and a lot of startups like started with this idea in mind. Give me some images of you, and I can just regenerate you with whatever clothing you need, or a professional headshot, or like a stylistic image of you, like a sticker or something. And you could generate with like DreamBooth on this is Stable Diffusion 1.5. You could generate some amazing images. Now, the thing is, for each subject, you would need 5 to 10 minutes of training. Well, that's a lot of GPU time for subjects, especially if you have like thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of users, right? And then the model size was large, but that was in part kind of like tackled by using low rank adaptation updates to your unit or your text encoder. So that's why we proposed DreamBooth, which is using only one input image. Hyper DreamBooth is able to personalize a model in around 20 seconds, which is 25 times faster than DreamBooth, than vanilla DreamBooth. The model is also 100 kilobytes, which is 1,000 times smaller than a vanilla DreamBooth model. And the core idea is a two-step process. So now it doesn't take like 5 to 10 minutes. It takes like around 20 seconds. But there's going to be two steps. One is you're going to get a really good guess by a hyper network of the weights of the model. And then you're going to do further fine tuning on those weights to get all of the details. And this actually we found works really well. And just gonna do a point here on the weaknesses of other methods that our method doesn't have. So one core weakness of fast methods is usually they try to like generate an embedding, then use this embedding to generate an image. So they do like a IP adapter type thing, but where your embedding is like a face embedding or something. This is very common. The problem is that the face embedding already is very kind of constrained to the real domain. So a lot of these have been trained on real faces. So a lot of times you'll end up with a face that is realistic. So you would end up like things like this one, it's the center, and this one. But this one right here would be pretty challenging, right? That's one thing that is very prominent. And then just think about bigger changes like, oh, I want a Lego version of myself. Those things really break a lot with those systems, like very, very often. So you don't get all the beautiful, like very nuanced parts of DreamBooth with these methods. Yeah, so that I think that's one of the main things that it, and also like a lot of stuff that ends up happening is you overfit to the pose of the face. So like, let's say you have 2 or 3 photos of the face like in these poses around here. Getting a profile view of that face is going to be really hard with those systems, just because of how they were trained. Whereas this doesn't have that as much. Oh, and then the third thing is that when you do a lot of these methods, try to train the unit of the diffusion model as well when they're doing that process. And then if you train the unit of the model too much for a lot of faces, like you're trying to, you have, hundreds of thousands of faces in your data set, then you start to lose your prior. And that's exactly what we don't want with DreamBooth, right? Like that's the core idea. And when you lose your prior, you lose a lot of things like all of these different poses for the faces and like, maybe things that the model knows about like occlusions and stuff like that. But you more critically lose style information. So if you're training a lot on real faces, then you're kind of telling the model, forget about all of the cool stylized versions of faces and Legos and Disney pictures and all of these types of faces that you've seen, and then it's not able to generate those, so it loses the prior. Yeah, so the contributions for this work, which is presented this year at CVPR, are first we come up with this lightweight DreamBooth, which is a kind of very much smaller DreamBooth model. Instead of having to update all of the unit parameters, we update a very small portion of them in a smart way. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. Then the second contribution was a hyper network. I think this is the first work in the Diffusion era that does like a hyper network that generates model weights. I think this is two things. It's like, obviously there's work before that is really great, and there's a homage to all of that work, like on StyleGAN, there's hyper network work, and even before that. But one of the cool things about using a hyper network, so it's really hard because you have to predict a lot of parameters, which are the weights. But another cool part is that you don't lose this like prior as much, and you have control over a lot of these things. And it is a general technique. So like using a hyper network, you could do it for any task. Like, okay, maybe your thing is not working with IP adapters, just training IP adapter, but maybe a hyper network gives you the capacity you need in order to solve this other task that you're trying to do. Maybe it's like editing or something like that, right? And then the last thing is we propose a rank relaxed fine tuning, which is that later fine tuning step that we do in a smart way, basically, that I'll talk about in a second. Okay, so going back, this is a two-step process. The first step number one is like, so first you start with like kind of like a very generic face that doesn't look like anything, right? After the first prediction of the hyper network, so this is a test time. After the first prediction of the hyper network, you get a face that is kind of directionally good. So starts to look like, in terms of like composition, like basically face structure and ethnicity, etc., to the direction of the subject. And then, but it doesn't look quite like the subject. There's a little bit missing. So the beauty of using a hyper network for this is that you can just then, after the first prediction, just fine tune a little bit more and get all the details. So this is what hyper really does. Here are some examples. So this is these are the reference inputs. And these are the initial outputs here. After the first hyper network prediction, you can see, a little bit of an older lady here. And then here, it starts to look a little bit like the reference images. But then after the fast fine tuning part that we have, which is 20 seconds. So this takes like a second or 50 or a half a second. And then this takes like 20 seconds. And is about, I think, from 30 to like 60 iterations. Like it depends on your model. So instead of by the way, DreamBooth is like on the order of 500 to 1,000 iterations or more. Like some people do 2,000 iterations. So this takes like from 5 to actually 20 minutes sometimes. So you get something much better in the end after the full thing. These look very comparable to like full DreamBooth things. Yeah, and this one is if you try to do the fast fine tuning without the initialization of the hyper network, you kind of get somewhere, but it's not really where you want to get. Let's talk about this lightweight DreamBooth idea. So, so this low rank adaptation came about in like language models. Just check the time. Very good. So this LoRA idea came about in language models, and it was basically like, oh, language model is huge, and I want to fine tune this, and my GPU doesn't fit everything, right? So then for each of the cross-attention or self-attention layers, which are linear layers, then I can decompose them as a down and an up layer. And then basically there's going to be like a full rank where you do this, where I guess like, yeah, so basically your attention layer is a linear layer that's n to m, n times m, right? And then you can decompose this into two, which is a down and an up layer. And then you can actually just pick this rank as a lower rank kind of approximation of that full space. And usually for DreamBooth, so people introduced online on GitHub, actually, there's no paper attached to this, but the CMO Ruiz introduced this at one point, like a couple of months after DreamBooth, this LoRa DreamBooth method. And then basically show that, yeah, it works just as well with the rank of 4. And so the size of the model becomes, instead of like gigabytes, became like tens of megabytes, right? And then even like with rank equals 1, we were able to do a really great job of approximating the identity. So we picked rank equals 1 for LoRa DreamBooth, but we can see that still we're gonna have to predict 400,000 variables with our hypernetwork. And that's a little bit too heavy for us. So how can we reduce this even further? So, you know, it might be hard because like, you know, your rank is already 1. Where do you go, basically? So the idea here was to grab each of these down and up layers and break them down even further. You could think of it as a LoRa of a LoRa, basically. And here you have a down aux layer and a down train. So what we did is basically, and then you pick this A scalar here just empirically. This down aux layer, you initialize it randomly, and we initialize it with orthogonal vectors, and you lock it, so you don't train that one. Same thing here with the up train and up aux. So you randomly initialize the up aux, and then you don't train it. And actually training, and then basically since rank equals 1, these are vectors of size A and size B. And just training these vectors, which we set at 150, so 150 parameters per layer, per self-attention or cross-attention layer, were enough to get us to find optimas that corresponded to the identity of the person and were editable. So it's crazy. So in that huge space of possible weights for your model, there are probably, I don't know, like thousands or a ton of like local minima that can represent your subject. And when you start to go into like lower and lower kind of dimensional manifolds of this, and even to this level of kind of like reduce the complexity to this level, you still find some minima that correspond to your subject. So yeah, in the end, we had 28,000 variables, which I guess like empirically, like if you just think about it abstractly, you could think like, yeah, 28,000 variables might be enough for me to capture the subject, and it is actually the case. So I think this is one of the most surprising things that we found in this work, that you're able to do this at all. And then, okay, so but this was all in service of trying to come up with a hypernetwork.
Is there a reason why the auxiliary parts are fixed? Is it just because they contain a lot of parameters?
Yeah, well, the reason is that if you train them, then then you need to predict them by using the hypernetwork. So that the whole idea of this is to train the least amount of parameters. So then if you don't have to train them, then you don't have to predict them using the hypernetwork, right? If you had to use this, then basically the parameter count would be the same as or large frequent numbers. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah.
I guess the part that confuses me a little bit is basically like, because like these two parts are initialized randomly, or
Yeah.
like using orthogonal vectors, but even with like random initialization, you can still only optimize the inner part to make it work.
Yes, exactly. It's very surprising. It doesn't work as well if you initialize them in different other ways. Like if they're not orthogonal, for example, it doesn't help. I mean, that was just an intuition that I had, that orthogonal vectors there would help. But yeah, it's very surprising that it works, and it works on all of our faces, and then it works for the hyper network as well to predict those. Yeah.
Is there any reason for A to be like higher than B? Could they be flipped? Could like having lesser for both of them also work?
Yeah, there's a reason. So this was empirical and it was based on, we did PCA on these, for like, we dumped a bunch, like for thousands of faces, we, dumped a bunch of these weights. And then we, checked, we did PCA for all of these. And then we found that the kind of principal components that explain the most variance, you could get most of the variance with 100 and then with 50 for each of them. So yeah, it was interesting to see that the up layer had less variety, I guess, than the down layer. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't even know if we say that in the paper. There's so much stuff in there. But yeah, one more, going back to your question, you could actually train the down outs and up outs on a very large data set of faces. But then you would still run into the problem of like you're training on real faces and not stylized faces, and is this like hurting anything? Da, 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 da. So like yeah, we didn't want to do that. Yep.
Oh, what is your intuition for using like orthogonal vectors? Like, why are they better?
Sorry, the orthogonal vectors.
Yeah, to visualize.
Yeah, so I guess it's just to preserve the most amount of information. Yeah. So I guess like if all of your vectors were collinear, then your downtrain would mean nothing basically. And if all of your vectors are orthogonal, then all of your variables in downtrain, the vector downtrain, mean the most amount of information. And then it just depends if you're lucky with your projection. And that we cannot control basically. But usually, yeah, you find some good stuff. Does that make sense? Okay.
Geometrically, you could sort of think about it like, these are non-square matrices, so, but if they're orthogonal, what they're doing is like some combination of a rotation and a projection. And so if you're rotating the data, you're not like destroying any of the structure that's already in those vectors, those A and B vectors.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also another way of seeing it is, yeah, you're projecting into this space represented by these orthogonal vectors. That's the most, if they're orthogonal, that's the least bad for the lower space that you can project it, but it just depends on how lucky you are with the randomness picking a good space.
Right.
It could be a really bad one actually, but there's so many of these, basically I think my intuition is that there's so many of these minima that it doesn't, that you're lucky almost all the cases kind of.
It's the lottery ticket hypothesis or whatever. The idea that these networks can just adapt to whatever random initialization they have enough parameters.
Yeah, it's even crazier in this case. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess it is related to that. I don't know if anyone has done a fine-tuning lottery ticket hypothesis, and then maybe I should decide. That's very interesting. Yeah. Anything else? But I saw a question. No. Okay. All right. So yeah. We might start going a little bit faster because I'm not sure a couple more things. So yeah, the hyper network training is basically large scale. You have a data set. Actually, it's not even that large scale. So we had 10,000 faces or a little bit more. And all of these are public, so you could do this in like a normal GPU lab. By the way, I use one GPU to do all this work, one A100. Even at Google, yes. I don't use a lot of GPUs for my work usually, because I don't know. I guess I was a PhD student, and then I didn't adapt too fast. Yeah, so you generate a bunch of weights for a data set of faces. So these are kind of like the lightweight DreamBooth weights, and then you generate them using DreamBooth first of all, and then you're going to train your hyper network using denoising loss, just like a normal diffusion model. And with weight regularization loss, which is an L2 loss between the dumped weights and the weights that you're predicting. Your hypernetwork's job is to predict these weights for the text-to-image diffusion model that correspond to that person, so that can denoise that person's face. So that's one part of the loss, but that also corresponds to the DreamBooth weights that you've previously generated. There you go. That was a quick way of saying that. And then the second part is fast fine-tuning. So once your hypernetwork has been trained, you lock it. You generate weights for your text-to-image diffusion model that you then inject into the model. And these are trainable right now. So then you do fast training on the DreamBooth task. So then first prediction will give you this, and after a bit of training, you will get this. And I think, do I explain the rank relax thing here? And I can think this is a good place to explain the rank relax thing here. It's like, okay, you could either optimize the weights that we were talking about, the very few weights, or you could just basically convert those into full weights and then train either the full weights or like a LoRa of any rank. So your fine tuning part can be arbitrarily like have arbitrary amount of detail. Because at the end of the day, storage doesn't really matter. The thing that really matters is how fast this is, right? And how accurate, like how good your approximation is of the phase. Yeah, so the hyper network, and this is not that important, I think, but it was basically like a transformer with a visual transformer encoder. Then you pass it through a linear layer and you have that face embedding. And then what you do is you have a transformer decoder that does like several refinement steps. And I think we ended up at 3, which was the best amount. And then you have some linear layers that predict the weights for each of the diffusion model layers. Okay. So here are some results. Yeah, I'm some people are thinking about doing this on Flux with this latest like open source model. That's really good, and I'm really excited. Hopefully, they're able to achieve this. These were results on SD 1.5, I think. So even SDXL doesn't have an implementation. So it'd be really cool to see if people are able to do stuff like this now. But yeah, one of the things is you could do like big shifts in semantics like this one here. Let me show more examples. So yeah, this is for, by the way, all of these input phases are not real people. So, but they're not generated using a diffusion model. They're generated using a GAN. So yeah, you can do different styles. You can see like the just really broad variety of like styles that you can do. So the model has not lost its prior at all. You do like anime, it works really well. You can do like charcoal drawings, etc. And you can see like in none of these does a charcoal drawing have a face that's colored, right? Or that it looks realistic. And you can see that a lot of these have very varied poses. So like you can see this pose here is completely different from this pose here, right? So those are some of the big wins of this project. And then here we compare against like DreamBooth and then phase 0 and then E4T, which are competing methods, phase 0 and E4T, which are fast. And you can see they do a pretty good job. It's hard to see everything here, but for example, one thing that I want to point out is this the Minecraft character. So as a Minecraft character, you still really get the semantics from the model and you don't lose those. Whereas phase 0 and E4T, which are methods, this one uses an encoder and this one uses, it's one of those fast methods that uses a conditioning on an embedding. You can see that they have kind of defaulted to a realistic showing of that. Like Funko Pop here, you can see like there's an actual really good Funko Pop with this person. And then DreamBooth also does it, but some of the other methods can get confused, like and can kind of revert to just showing the person because that was the original objective for training. Yeah, and some comparisons. So you can see that so for face recognition model and Dino and Clip, we were better than DreamBooth in textual inversion just because of some implementation tricks. Like this should be on par as DreamBooth, but with some implementation tricks, we're a little bit better. And then in user study, our method is preferred over DreamBooth and also over textual inversion and E4T. Yep.
Why should we expect it to be preferred over DreamBooth?
So I think that comes down to a couple of implementation. Two things. So one thing is the initial guess of the hybrid network is actually pretty good, and kind of sometimes helps convergence.
Okay.
With fixed parameters. So if you say these hyperparameters are fixed and we don't get to modify them, you do some DreamBooth maybe underfit. Whereas with those fixed parameters, so if you were able to like adjust, then you could actually make the DreamBooth outperform it because you can just like kind of like tune it perfectly. But for the hyper network, it gives a good initial.
So this is with like fixed compute.
Yeah, it's fixed compute
Yeah.
and fixed hyperparameters.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, I had another thing. Oh yeah, some implementation tricks actually. For example, masking the face when you're generating the image for the loss. is actually helps a lot. So just some implementation things as well.
Thank you.
All right, any questions there? So I'm going into my latest work. So this was released about a month ago. It's called Magic Insert Style Aware Drag and Drop. And this is a method to realistically and seamlessly drag and drop a subject into an image by inheriting the style. So you can see a little bit of like the expansiveness. I guess it's like DreamBooth is, generating subjects, your subject, style drops generating in your style. So already so many artistic possibilities and other possibilities are open. Then doing it faster is Hyper DreamBooth. And then this is basically, there's a lot of work on stylization, style transfer, generating your style, etc. But some, are these actually useful? Like, do you always want to generate an image from scratch? And this one addresses one of the kind of core things that people want to use probably is, I want to see myself in this painting, right? And then I want to drag and drop an image of my friend here into this painting or something like that, or into this meme. Or like my dog into a Van Gogh, painting. And those are things that you can do with Magic Insert. So yeah, we formulate this problem of style aware drag and drop, where you grab a subject or an object and you just drag it into an image and it gets plopped into that image and then adapts the style of the subject into that image and also produces all the context cues such as shadows and reflections of the subject with respect to that image. So you can see here, this goblin is dragged onto this image and you get like realistic shadows here and also the style has changed. And you can see this green blob here is dropped into this cave image and you can see realistic shadows and also the style has changed to adapt to that. And it does not only this like kind of like color changing, but it also does like more abstract things for styles. So it can change things like either more photorealistic or more 3D like, a video game like, or more like cartoon like. So all of these things are very cool. So the first part of this is this style-aware personalization. There's some similarities with DreamBooth. So basically, actually, number one is kind of like DreamBooth mixed with textual inversion. So you learn some two embeddings that name your character, V1, V2, and you also optimize the diffusion model for the denoising task. And then you're able kind of to insert this subject into your model. So now you can generate the subject, and again, we know that DreamBooth is the maximally like editable version of personalization, or at least the one that I know. Hopefully there will be others in the future that are faster. So one thing we do here is we get the background where you want to insert the subject. We get an embedding of that background, and then we do style injection into the diffusion model. So this is similar to IP adapter, and there's some work called instant style, so it's pretty similar to that one as well, which basically selects a subset of blocks that you have in your unit and only injects the IP adapter embedding into those blocks. And some blocks control more for style, some blocks control more for other things. And if you find for your specific model, if you find the blocks that are control for style, I don't think this happens across the board, but at least for SDXL, it definitely happens. So you can see here that you're able to regenerate through GNOME in this style here, like this wintry wonderland style. Yeah, and then comes like the problem of inserting a subject into an image. So one thing, let's just backtrack actually looking at this. So like the main inspiration for this was another work that we have with an intern that I hosted called RealFill. The work is called RealFill. Our intern's blooming because he's now at Google. And one of the key ideas for that work was to learn to do in painting on a set of images, and then with random masked parts of the image, and then you could actually outpaint not any of those images with like things that should have been there, etc. And I can show some stuff later, maybe if we have time. But basically, we thought, oh, maybe this RealFill thing can work, and I can like insert my subject into an image, and it actually does everything I want. So like this SD-edit in painting will, if I put my character here, he'll be like leaning on this, and then, or he'll be occluded by this, or he will be in front of it, and it's like all working out kind of, and then maybe even the style is adapted. Okay, none of those things were true when I tried it out. And basically like the subject was like cut in half, like it didn't exist. It didn't put any of the subject. When it put the subject, it put exactly the same thing, almost copy paste, but it erased the background. None of the things that we wanted happened, basically. So I tried a lot to try to get that to work, and I think it has potential to work at some point, but for now, I mean, I don't think it's working. So this work object brought from our team at Creative Camera at Google. So this is from some of my friends, came kind of to the rescue and gave the inspiration needed to finish this. And the idea here is that you can do with this object drop model, you can do object removal and object insertion. And just the idea is very simple, is you grab, so you have photographers take images of the real world with and without the object. So you gather a counterfactual data set. It's like, what would have happened if you remove this object? So it's like an actual data set of paired images with or without one object. And then you train a model that removes that object, given a mask. And then you train another model, given those remove. So then you can generate a lot of images using this removal model. Then you train another model to insert objects. And you can see it does really great stuff like this. So it can erase this glass here and also erase the reflection, or it can move this boat from here to here and insert the appropriate shadow. So what happens though? Okay, so like, okay, everything is good. We can generate it. 5 minutes? Okay, let me finish this real quick. So everything is good. We can insert this subject in here. But yeah, look at it, like it doesn't look that great, right? There's no shadow. It's not working very well. So we come up with an adaptation method that is pretty simple, but I think is kind of like the concept is pretty expansive and it can be very important for a lot of things now. And with adaptation, you can see that we get the shadows that we want. And actually, if you look closer, there's some artifacts here, and we lose those artifacts as well. So yeah, it doesn't work for the stylized kind of content that we wanted. So we propose this bootstrap domain adaptation, which is you have these two models that I was talking about, the subject removal model and the subject insertion model. And it's pretty easy. You collect a data set of your target domain. You use the subject removal model in order to remove the subjects. A lot of these images won't work very well because the model is not targeted for this, but actually some of them will. After a step of filtration, which is going to be either automated to like detect like artifacts or shadows, you can do this using several metrics, or manual, depending on the case, like if you have a lot of images. Then you get a set of filtered images. Use your filtered images to train the subject insertion model using the paired images here. And you're able to get something like this, where initially, like the real domain is this blue domain, and or the domain of the model is this blue domain, and the domain of things you're interested in is this red domain. Your some of the examples are correctly kind of like kind of fixed with this thing, but then you, after adaptation, basically more of the things that interest you are captured by the new model. And the surprising part of this is that we only needed 30 images to get the model to adapt domains. So that's a big kind of like philosophical thing where you start with a model that is trained on billions of images for or hundreds of millions of images for the full diffusion model. Then you go through a method that does kind of in-painting that is trained with tens or hundreds of images. Then you go to a method that does object removal that's trained with, actually that paper is trained with 1,000 and 2,000 images. And then for changing the domain of your target application, you only need 30 in this case. So that's one of the kind of philosophically interesting things. You can imagine doing this from the other way around. Maybe it's like a little bit more common, doing this like learning on simulated data and then transferring to simulated data. Yeah, and then lastly, we could do this really cool thing with LLM guided affordances. So using an LLM to guide what the subject is going to do, you can insert a subject and it will kind of tell you what the subject is doing in that location, and it'll adapt to that. So you can do this. So grab the subject and put it somewhere. It'll tell you that it's lying down, and it'll make the subject lie down right in that position. And then one last thing before I'm done, I just want to show a quick demo that you can see online. So just go to magicinsert.github.io and you can see some of these demos. So this is a pre-computed demo. Select the subject, select the background, and then you place it on the left or right. And you will get the adaptation here. So like, and one of the crazy things is you can see the style changes a lot, but also the pose of the object or the subject changes. So some of my favorite ones are these, I think, where, okay, maybe this one actually. Yeah, okay, I'll just try this one. But this is like more of an anime style and actually changes the cartoon style to be more. Yeah, and I guess, I guess that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I know folks have to leave, we probably have to vacate the room as well. We have some questions in between, so if you still have any questions, please come up at the end. Thank you.